So, longtime fans of the channel may notice new digs. That's because of a little saga I'll tell you about later on. I'd been in my old practice spot for around 7 years, so it was a little sad to say farewell. But now I think I'm somewhere even better. So I was going to do a video on moving studios, because everybody does those videos. Extreme studio build out. How to build a home studio for less than $1,000. But when I shared this photo last night, the comments I got gave me an idea. A bunch of people defaulted to, I got a new kit, or I was suddenly sponsored, completely missing the age of the kit and the fact that the room was different. And that's when I remembered something that's been dogging me for a while. These folks were all non-New Yorkers. In their worlds, the most novel thing about a photo of a different kit is the kit, because they only play their own, at home. Sorry if that's stereotyping, guys. I know there are exceptions, like the Greater Champaign-Urbana Kit Swap Club. But I'm talking about in general. Okay, let's back off the B-roll just slightly, okay? Don't do it. I know what you're gonna do, and don't even... Okay, do you feel better? Now are you happy? Anyway, in today's video, 10 things non-New Yorkers may not know about playing drums in New York. Stay tuned. Now that one was obvious. You're gonna do B-roll, but you're not gonna do... Now we're talking. As I was saying, stay... Number 1, practically everybody uses shared rehearsal space. Okay, I can tell whether a drummer lives in New York or LA just by their rehearsal digs.
I just wanna be free, not a slave to the stereotype.
LA. New York. LA. New York. What the fuck? New York. Hang on. What is happening?
Go live in the simulation.
Anyway, I don't have his permission to blow up his spot, so we'll just call him Mike. My point is, with few exceptions, a lot of drummers in New York and LA rent monthly practice studios. For two primary reasons, space and noise. Obviously rents are sky high in New York, and the difference between a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom with an extra bedroom for your kit could be like $1,000 a month. And the noise. I actually used to practice in my old apartment in Astoria until the super nearly killed me, and his whole family. Okay, I don't know for sure, but he had this look in his eyes when he answered the door. So, shared studios. Or lockouts as they're called on the West Coast. Where they can't just call things what they're called, they have to have a hip name for every... Anyway, in shared practice spaces you can make as much noise as you want because they're usually located in warehouses in shady areas of town. And I also find it easier to focus because you had to commute there and you're there to do one thing. As opposed to home where you can practice for 10 minutes, then all of a sudden the TV distracts you and you got the kitchen right next door. And that's why so many people from outside New York misidentified the novel thing about my new friend Mike's kit. Anybody from New York knows the point is the new rehearsal room. Okay, we've got a long list to get through, so let's go on to number 2. Number 2, nobody cares about fancy permanent setups. With few exceptions, whenever I see a beautiful permanent setup like these, I know the drummer's probably not in New York, for a few reasons. First, back when I was gigging regularly, I wanted my drums at the ready, which meant mostly they lived in the bags. Ideally, I'd just play the house kit at the studio. And failing that, I'd probably set things up as minimally as possible. We'll talk later on about the tom tax. Second, when you're sharing equipment, even with people on their best behavior, your snare is going to get dusty or corroded from the humidity changes when people turn the AC off at night. And as I've described, I've shared studios with people with less respect for gear than most of the viewers of this channel probably have. So best not to leave anything expensive set up overnight, and hence you're not going to set anything up that's too elaborate, because you're not trying to spend an hour setting up and tearing down, when you already spent a half hour getting to the space. Let alone leave a permanent mic setup on the kit, like this. So if you move to New York and suddenly all the kits you're playing start to look less like a Zildjian poster and more like a CBGB's poster, that's why. Which brings us to number 3. Number 3, everybody loves house kits even if they're shit. If you don't live in New York, picture your brand new 14-piece kit with the rack, the cymbals, and the gong on stage at the club. Now, picture packing that all up into the bags and then double parking your car, making 6 to 7 trips to load up all your gear, schlepping it across town, double parking at the club where there's no dedicated loading dock. You just have to park on the street, making 6 to 7 trips again to load your stuff into the club, with people honking at you, hopefully not getting towed, hopefully not getting a ticket, waiting till it's your set, spending 15 to 20 minutes setting up your fancy setup, playing your 45-minute set, then tearing down in 15 to 20 minutes while fans are trying to talk to you and the drummer from the next band is all in your business trying to get you to tear down faster. Hopefully your car is still there, then doing the whole thing in reverse, then collapsing into bed at 3 a.m. Now imagine you don't have to do any of that. You can ride the subway to the gig, share a beer or two with friends instead of doing farmer's carries loading in, actually talk to people after your set, then take the subway right home. And all you have to give up is this notion that your 45-minute set requires your 65-piece stage custom. Not only do New Yorkers love our house kits, we take perverse pride in making the worst kits sound better, which might help to explain number 4. Number 4, the weird no wing nut on any cymbal stand thing. I first noticed this when I got to music school. None of the cymbal stands had any wing nuts. I wondered why, especially when the department chair was yelling at everybody, "We just got new wing nuts! Make sure you put the wing nuts back!" 2 weeks later, no wing nuts again. It wasn't until years later that I read about the tragedy of the commons. This is from Wikipedia. The tragedy of the commons is a situation in a shared resource system where individual users, acting independently according to their own self-interest, behave contrary to the common good of all users by depleting or spoiling the shared resource through their collective action. Ouch. That means it's unrealistic to expect wing nuts to stay on the cymbal stands all year if they're shared cymbal stands, because it's easier to lose them and the penalties to any individual user for doing so are minimal. So smart drummers just don't even put them on. Kind of like learning to drink black coffee at the office after a year of everybody stealing your milk out of the fridge. Just like the house kit thing, I suspect New Yorkers took the lemon of this tragedy of the commons and made lemon souffle out of it. For some reason, it's a New York flex to switch cymbals in the middle of a tune. A cultural practice which may have non-New Yorkers scratching their heads. Although LA's got a bit of this scene too in spots like the Blue Whale. Which brings us to number 5, part of which may have originated in LA. Number 5, everybody's got a goodie bag with splash cymbals and goat-hooves. Accessorize, accessorize, accessorize. Probably a lot of people have seen Eric Harlan, or Chris Dave by now, with either goat-hooves or tambourines on the hats. Or Marcus. My contention is the goodie bag originated in urban scenes. Why? Because drums and cymbals are heavy, but goodies are light. The standard New York gig kit, if you can get away without bringing a snare drum, is cymbal bag with sticks in it and a goodie bag inside of that. And a drum key, a hi-hat clutch, and duct tape. Then Nate Wood popularized the splash cymbals on top of drums. They fit in a cymbal bag, unlike extra ride cymbals or, be still my beating heart, a drum. They're light, and they can completely change the sound of whatever drum you put them on. Need a higher snare drum? No, you don't. Need another ride cymbal or a stack with a weird different texture? No, you don't. If you're starting to notice a theme here, it's about only taking what you can carry and not trusting that other people are going to take good care of anything you leave set up. Ergo, number 6, bringing your own kit to a gig is low status. Perversely, if you have to bring your own kit to a gig in New York, that's kind of an amateur move. People will assume you either haven't been in town very long or can't get a gig somewhere with a house kit, which probably means you haven't been in town very long. And number 7, there's apparently a tom tax. In venues where drummers do have to bring their own kits, why carry extra weight? I'm convinced this is how the Mark Juliana setup first evolved. Okay, ready to talk about something different? Number 8, people not only don't clean their cymbals, they sometimes bury them in the ground. Look in the cymbal bag of any New York drummer and you'll see dingy, dirty cymbals with the logos worn off, right up until they're sponsored and they're doing something on TV. But when I see these beautiful polished cymbal setups, I know it's an outside of New York thing. I think it probably originated from old K's. There was this idea that the original old cymbals sounded better. Then somebody figured out that the dirtier a cymbal got, the darker and more complex. So we started aging cymbals like people age wine. The one reason I would leave my cymbals out on the house kit is so that they get dusty. Then you clean the dust off of the drum kit, but not the cymbals. I'm convinced that many of the current generation cymbals from makers like Meinl are meant to duplicate the complexity of some of these older cymbals. Another New York thing is playing rides as crashes, as Nate Wood is doing here, and Keith Carlock is doing here. This is less a practicality thing and more a hipster iconoclast thing if I had to guess. And speaking of the 55 bar, another loose New York law of physics. Number 9. We define subgenres by lower Manhattan venues. Say what? That just means that even in the age of the internet, the styles of music in New York are highly varied and highly siloed, and there's a lot of diversity in a small area. Let's take just a few examples from lower Manhattan. The Vanguard is a commercial jazz venue, and it's got a vibe and acoustics and a roster of artists that overlaps with, but isn't exactly the same as, that of Smalls, which tends to feature more unknown but still highly curated jazz musicians. There's curation and an in-group out-group dynamic, but it's more experimental than the Vanguard. And often people will play Smalls on their way to the Vanguard, which might only feature you after you've released several albums on major labels and toured the world. Both of those spots have overlaps with the 55 bar, but the 55 bar is hipster fusion. Wayne Krantz defined the contemporary sound. So you're more likely to hear Fender Rhodes than acoustic piano, and P basses with effects pedals turned up to 11. The 55 bar overlaps with New Blue, but New Blue has its own unique aesthetic. And it's more likely to feature unorthodox instrumentation, like drums and a DJ, or literally one person playing everything. Rockwood Music Hall, home to acolytes like Mark Juliana's Beat Music and YouTube Yoda Adam Neely's groups, overlaps with the 55 bar New Blue, but also has an indie rock streak. Then you've got the rock clubs. By the way, the scene venues are much more tightly curated and more likely to favor close relationships within the scene than the so-called pay-to-play venues, of which you could count the Blue Note as one, even though the Blue Note featured some great music as well. In general, you're probably going to get a more authentic experience at one of the scene venues. And even though the scenes are siloed, that doesn't mean the musicians necessarily are. Justin Brown might play the Vanguard with Gerald Clayton, then head across the street for a beer at the 55 bar, before sitting in at a late set at New Blue. Juliana might do an album release at the Jazz Gallery, then the next night play with Beat Music at Rockwood, or hop on a plane and hit at the Blue Whale. Are we ready for number 10? Bring this thing home. Okay, number 10. Everybody looks down on owning a car until you have one, and then everybody wants to be your friend. New Yorkers are exquisitely adapted to schlepping a minimal amount of gear to gigs. Whether it's only taking gigs with a house kit, then taking the minimal amount of gear to those gigs, goodie bags and splash cymbals instead of more crashes, then as a last resort, innovating subway-ready hand truck rigs where drum shells fit inside other drum shells, and there's all kinds of crazy shit. It's a little like Japanese gardening. Find the efficient frontier and that's your starting point. But eventually some of us break down and get cars. And immediately we're the most popular ones in our friend groups. Because taking the subway home from a gig in the middle of the night does suck. But I'd recommend a move to the outer boroughs before you get that car. And maybe that's the point. As it became easier to gig on the internet than in real life, as I moved to the outer boroughs, the need to schlep equipment to venues became less and less. But a lot of the old habits stayed. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and if you're looking to learn drums from an old, washed up New York guy, If you've watched the channel for a hot minute, if you trust me enough to study with me, you might be interested in my courses. The solo course, the practice course, and the granddaddy of them all, the coaching course. All of which we only open a few times a year, and all of which we only open to people on our list. And to get on the list, it's very, very simple. All you need to do is click the link below the video player, enter your email address in on the next page, and as a thank you for joining my list and a gateway drug to my courses, I'll send you not one, but 3 free video mini courses, each of which I assert will make you better at a certain subject in the next 3 weeks than you've gotten in the last 6 months. Dudes, it's been fun. Thanks for following me to my new digs. Always enjoy this. See you again soon.